Today, I wanted to talk to you about something really important if you're thinking about selling your home in San Jose or really anywhere in Silicon Valley in 2025. Hi, I'm Steve Moon of the Steve Moon Group, your San Jose realtor, and welcome to my channel. The market is changing, and I'm seeing a lot of sellers making avoidable mistakes that are costing them time, money, and momentum. So I'm going to walk you through 5 mistakes that sellers are making that are big and that are seriously hurting their chances of getting their home sold. So first, let's just set the stage. If you haven't noticed, we're in a different market than we were over the past couple of years or even 6 months ago. Inventory is rising, buyers are feeling cautious, and there's this general sense of economic uncertainty. A huge part of that, obviously, is because of this ongoing tariff crisis, which is affecting sentiments, especially here in the Bay Area. Remember, a lot of the wealth in Silicon Valley is tied to high tech and their stocks, and those stocks have been all over the place lately. When people's portfolios are unstable, and so is their confidence level at making big purchases, like homes. So if you're thinking about selling, you need to be sharp, and you also need to know what's going on right now. And you need to avoid these 5 mistakes. This one is huge. Over the last few years, especially right after COVID, we saw a huge influx of brand new agents entering the business. It was sort of like a gold rush, right? Where everyone thought real estate was easy money. Homes they heard were flying off the shelves. You didn't have to really do much to get into contract. And anyone with a real estate license and an Instagram account was suddenly calling themselves a top producing agent and advertising all over the place. But here's the truth. A lot of these agents only know how to operate during a hot market. They don't understand how to navigate or to negotiate when the buyers are cautious or concerned, and they don't know how to position a home correctly in a shifting market like it is now, or how to use contracts to protect their clients' best interests. Many of these guys have never had to actually sell a property because they've only had to list one and then wait for the market to kind of do everything for them. And listen, I'm not trying to throw shade at new agents. Everyone has to start somewhere, and we were all new agents at one time. But if you're selling a major asset, your biggest one, you don't want someone to be learning on your dime. Throwing your nephew a bone is a great thing for you, but not during a changing market. And I get it. Sometimes sellers are tempted by the promise of lower commission, but the discounted fee often comes at a bigger cost that's not seen. Lower exposure, weaker strategy, less marketing because they were paid less, so there's less to work with, missed details, and ultimately a weaker sale. You need someone who understands this market and who knows how to adapt. Now is not the time for trial and errors or favors for family members. There's a time and place for that. The market is different now, and you now have the option of not paying for the buyer's agent's fee as well. And that sounds awesome, right? You can choose to reduce the other agent's fees or pay them nothing at all. That's great as an idea or as a concept, but don't do that now. And not in this changing market. You just can't. This is not the right time to be doing that. So on the buy side, you don't want to give the buyer's agent a reduced commission, or worse, pay nothing. Because if you do that, they'll simply move on to the next listing that is willing to pay them a higher fee or a fee. And many are doing that right now as an incentive to bring in buyers as inventory is starting to increase. And you're going to be left out in the cold during a challenging market. And believe me, they are having discussions with their buyers and saying, if you don't want to pay me out of your own pocket, then let's go look at the properties that are willing to pay me my full fee. Very few buyers will want to pay out of their own pocket when they have so many other fees and costs during this whole home purchasing process. There are going to be discussions and negotiations happening between the buyer and their agent, and they're going to make a decision before they even go out and see their first home. So don't be tagged as that non-paying listing and put yourself at a competitive disadvantage. Remember, the choice is yours to make. And this is another one that's been carrying over from the ultra competitive market that we had during the pandemic. Back then, homes were getting multiple offers, even if they were on a busy street, had outdated kitchens or bathrooms, were next to something undesirable, like an apartment building. But buyers were desperate and inventory was very tight. But now, we're in a completely different market. It's more balanced right now. Buyers have options now that they hadn't had for many years. So if you're thinking that you can just skip the prep work and just throw your house on the market in its as-is condition, you're playing a dangerous and risky game. The truth is, presentation matters more than ever. Maybe more so now. I can't stress this enough. The way your home looks online is everything. We live in a visual world now. Buyers scroll through listings the same way that they scroll through social media. You have about 2 seconds to capture their attention, or they just scroll by. If your photos aren't stunning, if your video tour isn't captivating, or if your home just doesn't show well, they're gone. I still see listings with photos that look like they were shot with iPhones with bad lighting, or even worse, virtual tours that obviously look fake because the dimensions look off. It comes off as lazy and cheap, and buyers notice and will think that everything about your house is cheap, and you don't want that perception about your house. You've got to stand out, and not in a bad way, of course. Clean, modern staging, beautiful photography, well-edited video tours. These aren't extras anymore. They're now the baseline. You want buyers to be excited and want to get into their cars and come and see your home. Because nowadays, most buyers, don't even bother setting foot inside a home unless they already love what they saw online. Like I said, you have about 2 seconds to make that impression. So all of your marketing effort is all for that 2-second impact. Nothing else matters. This one may sting a little, but I gotta say this, right? A lot of sellers are pricing their homes based on where the market was, not where it is today. They remember those, pandemic years when home prices were shooting up month after month, 15, 20% a year, and now they want to price their homes still based on that memory. But that's not the market today. It's not where we are anymore. And here's an example. So let's say that your neighbor just sold their home for $1.5 million. You think that your home is a little bit nicer, so you want to list it at 1.75. But here's the problem. You're not competing with last year's market or even, market from 6 months ago. You're competing with the market today and today's buyers. And today's buyers are experiencing a different market. They're watching the comps, they're looking at values all the time, and they're not emotionally bidding things up like they used to a couple of years ago, or like I said, about 6 months ago. So if you're overpricing your home, here's what's going to happen. It sits, and then you start doing price reductions. And every time you drop the price, it sends a signal to the market that something is wrong with your house. That's going to hurt your negotiation position. So eventually, you may end up having to sell it for less than you could have had you priced it right in the first place. Price matters. And in this market, accuracy is more important than ever. You're not going to get a wishful thinking kind of an offer. Price it right and let the market do its thing. This one's tricky because on the surface, it might feel like it may be a good offer. Maybe it's for asking price or even more. Maybe the terms look good, but it comes with a contingency that the buyer has to sell their own home first. And I see sellers go, well, they're offering full price and we're not getting too much action. So why not? Here's why not. Once you're in contract, you're locked into your contract. Your house is off the market. You're opening up for inspections, going through all sorts of steps. And meanwhile, your sale is totally dependent on what's happening with somebody else's sale, and you have zero control over this. You don't know how serious that the buyer is. You don't know if their financing will eventually go through. You don't know if they'll get their cold feet and then want to back out. And if that deal falls apart, so does everything about that deal and all of your plans that go along with it. You've now wasted time, you've lost momentum, and you've potentially missed out on a stronger buyer that's out there. I only recommend considering contingent offers if the buyer's home is already in escrow, their contingencies have already been removed, and they've got some skin in the game, meaning that earnest deposit money is already in escrow and therefore at risk. Otherwise, don't put yourself into a position where your entire deal hinges on somebody else's situation and their complexities. This one gets overlooked quite a bit. Sellers get an offer, see a pre-approval letter that's attached, and assume that the financing is solid. But not all pre-approvals are created equal. And right now, I'm hearing from lenders that up to 50% of the escrows may be falling apart because the buyers can't actually deliver and close. That's why I always recommend that any serious buyer cross-qualify with one of my lenders. It's not about forcing them to use one of my lenders. It's more about having someone double check the file, make sure that the numbers make sense, the income is properly verified, that the credit score is solid, and that the buyer is truly motivated and ready to go. It's an added layer of protection for you as a seller. And bonus, if something goes wrong or sideways with the original lender, then you already have a backup lender in place who already knows the file and can deliver quickly, potentially saving the deal. This kind of insurance is worth its weight in gold. So that's it for me today. And please subscribe to my channel and hit that like button if you found anything here that was beneficial for you. And if you ever have any questions about real estate, or you just want to list your home, or you're looking to buy a house here in Silicon Valley, please reach out to me. I'd love to help you out. So hope to see you in the next video.